Okay, hi everyone, SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and now this is video 4, I believe, of the opening survey. Well, last time we looked at the open Sicilian, and now we're going to look at all the, or as many of the anti-Sicilians as I know, certainly the most major ones. Again, I apologize if I don't cover your specific pet system here. This one is going to be slightly different, or in that this video is going to feature a lot of breadth. We're going to go nice and wide. I'm going to cover a lot of different systems, but it's not going to be very deep. I'm going to give the base ideas of what tends to be happening, but I'm not going to go 10, 15 moves into any of these variations. Again, we're going to get a nice survey of what's going to happen, but not necessarily the most critical current theory, if you will. Quickly, what is an anti-Sicilian? This might just... what does that even mean? So last time we covered the open Sicilian, which is where... okay, we'll just look at the main line. Yes, we want this, take, and take. And so the open Sicilian is whenever white does this. He plays e4, he plays knight f3, then no matter what black does, he plays d4, and then he recaptures the knight. And this leads to that very interesting struggle that we noticed last time, in which black, he has two central pawns to white's one. And so black, in theory, can have greater central control, which is great for black. Whereas white, he has his bishops can come out, his knights can come out, he has extremely fast development, and we can notice that black's development is going to be much slower. And so this is a very interesting struggle. What wins? Is it the development advantage, the space, or is it that central control? Is it black's flexibility, where he can do all these different setups, and then eventually take over the game with the counter punching, with the central control, what have you? Extremely fascinating. And so an anti-Sicilian is basically anything that isn't this. And so it's going to be a system where white is not playing a fast d4 and trying to use his development. He's not going to give black the two central pawns to white's one. It's where white does anything else, basically. And we're going to see that through all the most popular anti-Sicilians. White does not get, usually, the same active piece play. But conversely, black does not often get... well, he doesn't get that central advantage either. And so that's kind of the trade-off. Let's look at the... I don't know if it's the most popular one. Well, alphabetically it is. This is known as the Alapin. And we can see here that the idea is that if black would do nothing, take, and then this would just be a dream for white, would it not? He's got his central pawns. It's an even number. And he still has his easy development. So life's pretty darn good. This would be the perfect world, would be this getting two pawns in the center and exchanging. Though even here, to be perfectly honest, it's not 100% clear if white's got the super automatically best game. At any point, d5 is going to come in. And then white will be left with either an isolated pawn or an interesting structure. Something to look at. Anyway, I shouldn't be musing on camera. Though this is kind of, again, this is the absolute best case scenario for white. Again, he's got the two pawns, he's got easy development, he hasn't had to give anything up for that. So that would be perfect. And so, black is going to do one of two things to counter. The most popular, and probably the best, is counterattacking the pawn, with knight forcing it forward. We're going to get a position like this, and where at first glance it seems as if white, he's got his two pawns and easy development, and black doesn't have that extra central control. Isn't this a win for white? But it's not completely clear. If we were to look back at the other position, right, where these pawns are controlling the four very key central squares, and this knight is always in danger of being hit with d5 at a certain point. If we compare that with the actual, not that variation, this variation, let's look at take. these pawns are only controlling the dark squares. And we can see that this knight is just a beast. It's very, very happy, and it's the best piece currently on the board. And if you know anything about the Alekhine defense, if you don't worry, I'll have an opening survey in the coming weeks that talks about the Alekhine. The whole idea is trying to lure white's center forward. Again, if I were to back up, here these pawns are absolutely great because they cover a lot of squares. The problem, though, is that as soon as it moves forward, well, that gives squares for the black pieces. And now this pawn is much closer to the black army, so it can be counterattacked. It can be hit. And white's center is in danger of being shown to be overextended, to be exposed, and then white is just stuck defending it. This is why the knight f6 idea is so popular, and it's so good, because white's center, black is going to argue, is in this extended format. White would much rather keep this pawn here if he could, but it's not really possible. And so, that said, it's not as if, black is winning here or white is losing or vice versa. It's going to be a game. And what's going to happen is it's going to really be determined, is the center a strength or is it a weakness? Black is going to play usually some combination of e6 and d6, trying to hit something back. Worth noting that after, let's do this, e6, knight f6, d6. If you have a position like this, where all of a sudden white is now stuck with an isolated pawn, and we can see that black has the perfect knight blockade already. So that shows the structural dangers for white, that if he can't just exchange his pawns, because then he's going to be left again with a weak pawn. Not very good. So black is going to play these types of moves. He'll play bishop e7, he's going to castle. White's going to try and use these pawns to launch his own attack. And so he's going to play things like knight f3, either bishop to d3 or to c4. He's going to castle, and he's going to see if he can try to attack the king. So just like the normal Sicilian, though it's slightly different because his center is in a different way. In practice, black does very, very well in this type of position, and it's probably the best way to go. And it's certainly the most practical, and it scores the best in the database. So, if you're black against the anti-Sicilians, knight f6 is probably the best bet against the Alekhine. I'm just going to quickly say the variation that I always like, it always seems contrary to the most popular, is the idea with d5, which is the second main line. And the reason for this is after take, it's as if we've got an improved Scandinavian from black. I played the Scandinavian as black for quite a while. And why this is so nice is that because there's a pawn here, the knight can't go here to chase the queen. And so the queen can actually stay on the d5 square much longer than it can in the normal Scandinavian. And then black tends to have more active piece play here. Or at the very least, I like these positions more. I don't like giving white the space advantage with the pawns on e5 and d4 like we see right here. I'd rather avoid that, so that's why I like this d5. And you don't play c4. No, usually it's something like this. And we can see just that it's going to be similar. The difference is white is going to be harassed likely with an isolated pawn. But because he's getting a normal IQP position, white still gets his regular attacking chances, but it's a game. I really like, given the choice, if I had to play one of these two lines of the Alekhine, I'd play this one, as black. But, that's only one of the anti-Sicilians. There's more. Let's look at the closed Sicilian, which I believe is the most popular variation of anti-Sicilian. And usually we'll go something like this with f4. And so again, this is actually let's look at a couple moves here. Let's do something like this. I'm assuming this is all the right move. I don't play this for either color, in all honesty. Oh dear. That's white to move. So we reach a position like this. And so this would be the closed Sicilian. And one of the nice things about this, well, first off, again, in the regular open Sicilian, white is trading a center pawn in order to get very active piece development. We can see white is not doing that here. He doesn't have a space advantage. He doesn't even have a development advantage. And he certainly doesn't have, his pieces don't have that free mobility they have in open Sicilian. Of course, conversely, black does not have the central advantage. And this is a much slower system, in which white is slowly developing behind his pawns. We can imagine something like bishop e3, queen e2, bring the rooks over, and he's going to try and push these pawns in here. And it's very easy for black to get into a passive position, or to let white's build-up reach critical mass without any counterplay. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, when I play the Sicilian, according to my Blitz opening statistics, I do the worst in this type of structure as black. The closed Sicilian, it like beats me like 65% of the time. It's something I need to work a lot better at. One of the reasons is that this is one of those perfect amateur openings. We can see that white is perfectly solidly developed. He has no real weaknesses. So he's going to move his king out of the way, so there's no checks on this diagonal, so that's always going to be fine. And it's going to be slow, it's methodical, it's thematic. You can even start pushing these pawns. And everything is aiming at the black king. And so it's one of those things where if black makes a mistake, he's just going to get checkmated. What is black's counterplay? Well, it's not really on the king side. Typically, let's see if I can color it red, we can see this bishop is aiming over here. So it's kind of like the dragon, where black is going to be, you know, doing things like this, maybe getting d5. He's playing kind of in the center, but mostly on the queen side. But again, this leads to one of those positions where, let's say white makes mistakes, he's going to lose a pawn, or he's losing exchange, he's losing something on the queen side. If black's make a mistake, he gets checkmated, right? And so the risk that black faces is much, much higher. And if this is kind of your main system as white, where you're mostly playing the closed Sicilian, and you're aware of the common ideas, the common tactics, you probably have a pretty big practical advantage, because the black player doesn't always see the closed Sicilian. It's not as comfortable. They certainly don't study it as much, because we only study the main lines. That's what Sicilian players do, right? You study the heck out of the dragon and the Sveshnikov, but you don't really care about the anti-Sicilian. So this is an extremely powerful practical weapon. And honestly, if you're playing black, you're going to want to study that beyond what I'm saying, because again, if you just follow whatever I think, you're going to lose 65% of the time. So you're going to need something a bit more than that. But this is the general idea, and it's extremely powerful, it's extremely effective. Again, it's much more popular at amateur level, but it also works really, really well. If you're an amateur, and so you're by definition not a professional, it's really something worth trying. I think it's a pretty easy system to do. Closed Sicilian. And honestly, it's going to be something that I'm going to play a little bit, because I mean, if I lose to it a lot, I should start playing it as white so I can see how better to counter it. Alright, maybe I'll find ideas, I'll find out, oh, maybe it's not so easy for white. I'll find those hidden details that you don't notice when you play it. Or I'll just find it's a perfect opening and I'll play it for life. So, whenever there's an opening you don't do really well, it's often a really good idea to play it yourself in reverse. So if you always lose to the Sicilian as white, you could try playing it as black. So then you could see, that's what white does. Ooh, these are the problems that black faces. You don't often appreciate an opening, especially if it's an opening you think is easy, until you play it yourself. Anyway, so we've covered the closed Sicilian, we've covered the Alpine Sicilian. Let's look at the gambits. In here, there are two main gambits. There might be more, but this one is the two popular ones. We've got the b4 and we've got the d4. I'll start with the b4 because honestly this is a gambit that I would not recommend in the slightest. I'm a big fan of gambits. Gambits are great. This is not my favorite one. Again, the idea here is we're offering a pawn so that we can play d4, we're dominating the center. Again, notice how the center pawns are the same. And so black does not have his advantage or his superiority in the center, but he's up a pawn. So that's nice. In practice, white generally doesn't play the d4. He's playing some type of this a3 idea, where he's hoping to maybe either use this bishop to annoy black. Maybe if we ever see something like this, for instance, the dark squares are weak and black can't castle. And in all honesty, the wing gambit simply leads to messy positions where you kind of hope to, I don't want to say swindle, but kind of like Mikhail Tal, right? The sacrifice might be questionable in terms of soundness or validity, but in a practical game, you have to defend, and it's perhaps easier for black to make mistakes. The real problem with the wing gambit is that, especially with all these a3s, is that it's just really easy for black to play d5. With the perfect counterattack. Again, just like with the Anti-Sicilian, you can't play knight c3 because there's a pawn there. There's a really common, well, I've had this happen a couple times where white will take the pawn and then whoops, lose the rook in the corner, so that's never very good. And so white cannot take the pawn, white cannot play knight c3. Black just has a really, really good version of either the Scandinavian or the Alpine variation we looked at earlier, and he's on a pawn. So I don't know what else you can complain about. I score pretty well with this as black in my blitz games, and so this, in my opinion, is the real problem with the wing gambit, why I would not recommend it. And again, like, there's no point in just trying to win all the pawns in the world, trying to take everything. You know, just play d5 and get a good game. And d5 also works very well. Sorry, if white doesn't play a3, if he plays the d4, play the d5. Again, if you take, it's the exact same thing. If he tries to push, then we get kind of a strange-ish, almost what would you call it, a pseudo-French idea. But the idea is that black hasn't played e6 yet. So he's going to be able to develop this bishop somewhere, and then play e6, and he's in a French position up a pawn. So there we go. And again, we'll cover the French in the opening survey. I believe that'll be the next video, actually. So that's the wing gambit. Now, again, if black obliges white, and he takes one or both pawns and doesn't hit back with d5, it can get to some pretty funky positions. I believe Simon Williams has some videos on the wing gambit. He certainly played it in his blitz games, so if you want to see some ideas for that. But again, practically as black, you should just play d5, and that's really all I should really say about that. We then have the other main gambit is d4, the Smith-Morra gambit, which typically goes like this, which is a completely different ball of wax. This is a fantastic gambit. One, it's simply easy, in that from here, all your follow-ups are extremely simple. You can put the bishop anywhere, you can put the queen anywhere, whoops. You put the rooks anywhere, and you get attacking chances. It's great. Mark Esserman's famous book, Mayhem in the Morra, is all about this, and it shows some beautiful tactics and sacrifices and games and strong players getting ripped to shreds after a single mistake. And this is really the main appeal to this opening, is that, okay, you're giving up a pawn, and some people, they might question how sound this is. There are people that like to say that this is unsound. I don't think so. I think if there is a sound gambit, this has to be one of them. So anyway, if black makes even a tiny mistake, he's facing enormous pressure. He makes another mistake, he loses. Whereas white just does thematic, simple, easy development, especially in a blitz game, extremely powerful. And it's nice and easy. What do you do as black? Well, you could try to hang on to the pawn and pretend to show that it's an unsound sacrifice and you're simply up a pawn. However, there are two practical things that you could do. One is you could, this is one that I've done quite a bit, is you just play d3. Because now the knight can't go here, and so usually white will be forced to play c4. Sorry, something like this. And so now the position has completely changed, and it's kind of a Maroczy bind-ish structure-ish, which we'll get to in a second. Where this bishop is usually it wants to be on e2, and the pawn had to move twice to get to c4. And at the very least, white does not get that normal attacking Smith-Morra gambit that he was looking for when he played. d5 is also possible, except for take. The knight can't come to c3 right away. The thing is, white is going to take the pawn next and then play knight c3, and your queen is going to move. So I'm not as big a fan of d5 here as I am in the strict Alpan variation we looked at earlier. However, knight f6 is the easiest move to do, because after e5 and then take, you'll recognize this from the Alpan variation. It's the exact same position by a transposition. And again, white doesn't get that normal huge attack. He might get some attack, but again, it's nothing near the gambit and nothing near the open Sicilian, and black gets his own central counterplay as well. And so what makes this so nice is that you can play it against both the Alpan and the Smith-Morra. And many people do that, and that's why this opening, I believe, is not as popular among professional and the higher rated players, just because this knight f6 is such an easy way for black to completely sidestep the Morra gambit. And that would be my main recommendation. If you play knight f6 against the Alpan, you should definitely play it here. Again, because it's simple, and you're not giving white what he wants, which is, again, this type of gambit attacking play. We'll look at just a couple more. I want to keep this under half an hour if I can. We're going to look at a couple of lines now that stem from the knight f3 move order. Against knight c6, which is what actually I guess Magnus is playing a lot nowadays. The main anti-Sicilian in this position, and it's become an opening to itself, is the Rosolimo variation, which I honestly can't really do it justice. I don't play these positions very well with either color, as embarrassing as that may sound. But the general idea is, okay, again, black can make a lot of different ideas, and so can white, is to reach a position like this, where white is going to, sooner or later, double black's pawns, and then he's going to play very strategically, in many ways somewhat similar to the Nimzo. We're going to castle, you can imagine we're going to play d3, sorry, let me just put it on the board. And so he's putting all his pawns on light squares, whereas he has a dark square bishop. And in fact, it makes even more sense to play a very fast h3. I'm not sure, you'll have to maybe check with a database to find when h3 the exact time is to play. But the idea is white is going to put, I don't even know. Sure, why not? White has all these pawns on light squares, so he's really playing against that light square bishop. He's challenging it to not have a future. Whereas, again, he has a dark square bishop, and his dark square bishop can go everywhere. There might be even tactics here, just ignore that. So strategically, what white is doing is he's putting his pawns on light squares, which is great, and then often he wants to kind of see if he can do some counterattacks against this guy. For instance, white would play something like c4 and b3, so that way this pawn can never move, and then bishop a3, which attacks the pawn, knight c3 to a4, which attacks the pawn, and black is stuck with this permanent structural weakness, which is very similar to the Nimzo, which is the other opening, which has an early exchange for bishop versus knight. At the same time, this is just one possible way of playing, and black has many different setups, and white has many different setups, and it's something that I cannot, again, I don't know well enough to really go into detail. This is the one variation that I kind of know, and I tried, but again, I didn't have very good success with it, so who knows. if you want to play the knight c6 Sicilians, this is something you 100% need to expect, because it's becoming more and more popular, and in many masters will play this instead of d4 against it, and so that's led many amateurs to do it the same as well. Against d6, this is something I have had better success with. It's the same idea with bishop b5. And I play this with a very particular idea in mind. Black can block with either the knight or the bishop. I think the bishop is the most popular. And often we take with the knight. And there's a really... Sorry, let me just get to it. Where if we can get this d4 in, and notice how the queen is defending the pawn, so that way we haven't moved our knight yet, this is going to let us play c4. And this is my preferred way of playing this type of system. And this is known as the Marozzi bind. M-A-R-O-C-Z-Y, if I spelled it correctly. I believe it's Hungarian, and it's actually like it's not pronounced the way we Westerners think it is, but it's become to be known as the Marozzi bind. And simply put, white is arguing that he has a central space advantage, and he's going to put the knight in here to c3, he's going to develop normally, he's probably going to play f3, he puts his rooks in the open files, and he has a simple space advantage where he's going to slowly push forward. I love these positions as white. I score extremely well with them. The one thing is, compared to a normal Marozzi bind, is that we've already exchanged a pair of pieces. The light squared bishops were traded. Now, the light squared bishop isn't normally the best piece for white in these type of positions, but the thing is, white is arguing that he has a space advantage, and he's trying to squeeze black. When you have a space advantage, you don't really want to trade pieces, because that makes it an easier job for your opponents to find squares for his pieces. Imagine there was a bishop here, right? Then it's staring away the knight. Or imagine there's a bishop on this square. Well, then that's the square the knights want to go to. Normally, let me just delete the arrows. These knights, they do this little dancing around here on these squares, or they want to go from, c6 into b4. And because white has all his pawns, the two central pawns on light squares, black tends to put his knights in particular on the dark squares, and he tries to get counterplay that way. That said, if white plays very, very solidly, so with knight c3, bishop b, like the way most white players play, the way that I play, there isn't a lot for black to do. He simply has to wait and react. And especially at the amateur level, most black players don't do that very well. They just, especially if they're not familiar with this, because this, again, is an anti-Sicilian. If you spend all your time studying the Najdorf or the Dragon, you're not going to see this very often. And though you don't play it very well, this is the only structure that I played, and so I had that experience advantage where I'm able to slowly grind them down. A really interesting way of playing. Actually, I'll just normally. So the bishop b5 is the one way of doing it. The other way is here. Again, the main move is knight c3. But then this is a normal open Sicilian, where black, again, he can play a6 or e6 or g6 or knight c6 or probably any move, in all honesty, and it reaches some type of Sicilian. If you play f3 instead, this is known as the Prinz variation, I believe. And the idea is, if black does a normal move, let's say, g6, we're going to play c4, and then we've got the normal Marozzi bind, where we've got knight c, not bad. Knight c3, bishop e3, bishop e2, castle, queen d2, and actually let me just put this on the board, because white has an extremely thematic way of development. You basically do this no matter what, oh, sorry, it's black to move. I'm just putting some random moves on the board. Look at white's position. As white, you do this every time, and that's nice. And it's not so easy for black to do anything to counter this or to disrupt this. It's because you're developing behind your pawns, you're nice and safe, everything is great, you're going to slowly either expand on the queen side. Maybe you can jump a knight into d5 and one of these files open up. Or we're going to slowly start expanding in the center on the king side. We could even, throw our king over here and start pushing our pawns up. And you've got a lot of flexibility. And in these type of positions, again, many black players aren't very happy with this. They don't really know what to do, and they just kind of let you get squeezed. If you look at my blog, SmithyQ.com, I have a number of games in this type of position where I show how to, I slowly apply pressure, and then usually I win. If it's on my blog, it's usually because I won. I think there's one or two videos as well in this type of structure on the YouTube channel that you can look up as well. The problem with the Prince variation is that black has this option of playing e5, your knight would move, and then playing d5 before we have a chance of playing c4. Now this would lead to a type of structure like this. This is the main line of the Prince, or it's one of them, but it's not exactly what I'm hoping for. Thankfully, I think I've only ever seen this once. Most black players aren't aware and they just play on autopilot. Even some high-rated players in correspondence chess. But this isn't really what I'm after, which is why I don't really play this anymore. Another thing to look at is that there's always this idea of sacrificing the knight and then having this queen h4 we're coming up, and then your king is running. This isn't really what you want on move 8 in the opening. Like, frig, this is getting kind of crazy. So those are the reasons I don't really use this anymore, but I did use it quite successfully for a number of years. And as black in these types of positions, sorry, I should probably, I say something, is, again, in a perfect world, you want to start exchanging pieces. So, exchange knights. Usually you put your bishop on c6, so that way you can reroute the knight. Often you push some pawns. You try and see if you can fight for some space on the queen side. And if you can get to an endgame where you have one knight and he only has his light squared bishop, then this bishop is bad. Especially if all of these pawns are stuck on white squares, often white will play b3 at some point. And so this bishop is just a big pawn at this point. It's like a checker piece. It can only move, one square diagonally. And you can get your knights or your bishops, and you get some play on the dark squares. Things are nice. A really good idea is to move this knight and see if you can get some f5 in. If that is well timed, so you leave your rook on the f file, this is how you can start getting some play as black. But that said, I really like these positions as white, and 9 times out of 10, I would play them as white. And if I knew my opponent would let me do this, I would do this every single time, bar none. So, that there is more or less most of the anti-Sicilians. There's probably, I know in fact there are other ones as well, but I've already hit my half an hour, so we're going to call it there. But that is the general idea of these Sicilians. And you can see how, for most of them at least, not so much with the Mozzi bind there at the end, but white does not get his super active development, but also black doesn't get his central control with his 2 central pawns. And there's very different flavors of position. Some are more strategic, some are wild and crazy like the gambits, but there's a lot of options for both sides. If you go to, one second, let me look this up. Okay, I found it. If you go to Chessable, which is becoming my favorite chess website ever, there is I'm 95% sure this is free. It's by German MC. He's a user, Black versus the Anti-Sicilians. And this is going to give you a trainable variation of most of the things that I've just said. There's going to be differences and what have you, but this is an extended option for looking at especially the other things that I haven't mentioned, or if you just want to get a chance to practice, learn a bit more about them, you can take a look at this again. I'm 90% sure it's free. I have it, so I can't unbuy it or anything. I don't think I bought this. Anyway, check it out. 95% sure it's free. I'll have the link downstairs in the description, so you can take a look at that. Otherwise, that's going to be it. Again, we'll try and get as many of these openings done before the summer is over. Otherwise, that's that. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.